Now, in keeping with our theme in today's episode of housing in the city of Seattle, we had Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson on Wednesday talking about junk fees. And there's a proposal to ban landlords from what they call junk fees in rental agreements. And there was a rally inside Seattle City Hall on Wednesday. Dozens of tenants were sitting there on the floor inside City Hall, cheering the mayor over her proposal. And this would again require rental listings to clearly delineate mandatory fees that tenants have to pay, such as late fees and Wi-Fi and that sort of a thing, and not allow them to implement others. So what is exactly a junk fee? Well, it's kind of still up for debate and the proposal is not yet finalized. But here is part of Mayor Katie Wilson's speech.
Seattle is now a majority renter city. And this legislation is about transparency and it's about affordability. It's about creating a level playing field that rewards responsible landlords. And it's about creating housing stability for renters and stability for our neighborhoods and our communities. For me, this legislation started far back before I stepped into the mayor's office. As many of you know, I was a community organizer. Shout out to the Transit Riders Union and the Stay House, and the Stay House, Stay Healthy Coalition. And that coalition came together and began organizing in 2021 during the COVID-19 pandemic, as renters began to see massive rent increases, and we saw eviction spiking and housing instability increasing.
Now, over the last several years, Seattle has instituted a series of policies aimed at protecting tenants, but a lot of these things have also irked landlords, many of whom just simply wash their hands and said, I'm out. You're making it too difficult to even make a living and be profitable as a landlord in the city. There's been laws, going back to COVID, of course, that limited evictions, even if people weren't paying their rent for months at a time, requiring landlords, if they were going to evict somebody, to potentially pay for their relocation fees. So it's, again, been kind of very much in favor of tenants' rights over landlord rights. So no vote on this as yet, probably later this summer. And my colleague, Seattle reporter Randy Diamond, put up an article at the Center Square Washington's page today with a lot further detail on this. So I encourage you to check out his article. Now, speaking of the income tax, it has been tough to find out where one member of Congress, who represents a district here in Washington state, stands on the income tax. We're talking about District 3 Congresswoman Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. The Republican National Committee believes that that district is very much up for grabs and that Republicans could gain back that seat in the House. They believe that Senator John Braun, Republican of Centralia, current House minority lead, Senate minority lead, has the potential to regain that seat. He's been doing very well in recent polls. He, of course, is strongly opposed to Washington's new income tax. And they believe the fact that Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is unwilling to say publicly where she comes down on this makes her even more vulnerable. Here's part of my conversation with Senator John Braun.
Yeah, in spite of all her claims to be moderate, she has been pro-tax in every aspect of her voting in Washington, D.C. As recently as last year, she voted against the largest tax reduction in our country's history. She has been unapologetic for that. She talks a good game when she talks about affordability, but on the issues that really matter, the issues that cost individual taxpayers, individual voters more money in their daily lives, she's been absolutely wrong on the issues. And in this case, she doesn't want to say anything because she won't buck a very far left, very progressive Democratic Party.
So Senator Braun referenced Marie Gluesenkamp Perez sort of dodging questions and about the income tax. And I've reached out, I should say, to her campaign on multiple occasions, gone back and forth with her campaign contacts. Sometimes they say, "What's your deadline?" The next day I might get, "Have you run that story yet?" Or, "We're working hard to nail down a time she's available." This has gone on for weeks now. And so I'm going to go ahead today and publish my article without a response specifically from the sitting Congresswoman. But the RNC pointed me to some information. Basically, we know where she comes down on the income tax because she's an incumbent and has endorsed Washington's Democratic basically platform, their agenda priorities, and therefore endorsed taxes on the wealthy. Um, she was one of a select few who drafted the party's platform, which called for a fair and just tax system for all, and specifically to quote, tax the highest incomes. So an RNC spokesman emailed this to me. Marie Gluesenkamp Perez voted for an income tax and is now desperately trying to hide her pro-tax record. Gluesenkamp Perez is a total phony, a spoiled Portland rich kid whose entire persona is completely fabricated to hide her far left beliefs. And that was from an RNC spokesman. So again, I have reached out to her campaign and repeatedly given her opportunities to, talk to us about where she's at, or even just talk to us about the campaign and the fact she's trailing right now in some of the recent polling. If they decide to give us some time and grant an interview, we of course will share that with you. All right, we now have the police report, I should say, on the investigation in the Tri-Cities involving a man who is accused of stalking the daughter of Pasco Republican Senator Nikki Torres, apparently trying to see if, in fact, she was living at the home that she owns, but her daughter and granddaughter are living there, as opposed to a different residence that she is currently, residing in. She did have to move, and she's made no secret of that. She had to move so that she could run when there was some racial gerrymandering done. So, in order to keep her Senate seat, she had to move from the 15th to the 8th legislative district in the state of Washington. So, here's the latest on this. Kennebec School Board President Gabe Galbraith, who is also a Republican, along with one of his campaign staffers, they're both now under investigation for allegedly helping this guy who staked out outside the home, allegedly, of Senator Nikki Torres's daughter. Logically, and Senator Torres says this as well, they were trying to maybe see if she was coming and going. You're really not living there, you're living here. It's not just your daughter living here. Trying to catch her not living where she said she was living. Her opponent, Gabe Galbraith, has again accused her of sort of district hopping so that she could continue to run. And the man who's accused in this, remember the 21-year-old Trevor Delorme, he appeared in court last week on the stalking charges after, again, he was caught outside that home. But now the police report has detailed some other things. We can put up part of this for you again after the court appearance, and we got the police report sent to us as well here at the Center Square. And it says that uh, Gabe Galbraith, coordinated and directed operations, and that Benson Behan, one of his campaign staffers, I might be saying that wrong, pardon me if I am, it's Behan, assisted in coordinating operations with the Benton County Republican Party. And again, they're part of this open criminal investigation into claims of harassment and stalking. Now, again, this is a challenge in the 8th District. They're both Republicans. So I spoke last week to Senator Torres before we knew that Gabe Galbraith and one of his campaign staffers were named as part of the police investigation. I want to share with you part of that conversation.
We really should be running a campaign based off on merits and what we're going to do for our community. And if my opponent thinks that a tax like this and coming after my family is going to break me, it is not. And I'm going to fight back. I'm definitely going to fight back. And I'm going to make sure that there is a trial.
I have interviewed Kennebec School Board President Gabe Galbraith in the past, multiple times actually. again, as the school board director or president of the school board directors in Kennewick, that district is one of several in Washington that has stood up to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction against some of the transgender um, policies and ideology being pushed. They passed some, I don't know if it was a resolution or just read a proclamation, one of those things at one of the school board meetings. So I've spoken with him on that, and then spoke to him when he made the decision to run for this Senate seat being vacated by Senator Matt Banky, who's running for Congress. So I again reached out 2 times last week and again this morning to say if he had any comment. I do understand that now that he and his campaign staff are named in the investigation, he might be a little hesitant about providing comment. So I did get a state GOP Chairman Jim Walsh news statement today. Um, he told me last week we've not endorsed either candidate. Again, they're both Republicans. And he said, I see qualities in both. But he sent me this new statement today, which says this. It says, again, this is from GOP Chairman Jim Walsh. Stalking is bad. It's a crime. Local law enforcement is still investigating the situation, so facts are still emerging. Speaking generally, it's possible to confirm someone's legal residence without engaging in illegal activity. And of course, that's going to be, up for interpretation of the court, potentially a trial by jury to decide if, in fact, this guy, who admits he sat outside the house and took pictures and video for hours on end, being put up to that task by potentially another competing campaign. I don't know if that's illegal or not, or if that constitutes stalking. That'll be up to the courts to decide. But the primary is now less than a month away. Yes, it's July the 6th. August 4th is our Washington state primary, and Torres is calling on Gabe Galbraith to resign because of this investigation. No evidence at this point that that is expected to happen, but we're watching very closely. And finally, in today's episode, roughly 46 million American households have opted to rent or been forced to rent rather than purchase a home. Sometimes it's out of convenience. You're moving around for a job. You're new to a city. Of course, you're going to rent and make sure you're going to be there long term. Other times it's cost, availability, but renting is not always cheaper than buying a home. Of course, the right road you take depends on a variety of factors, including an individual or family's financial means, of course, and how well the real estate market is doing. So there's so many different factors that play in. So to determine where renters can basically get the most bang for their buck, WalletHub compared more than 180 rental markets in large metro areas across the country, considering 21 different key measures for rental attractiveness, not just how cheap the rent was, but how large of a place you got for that. How's the job market look there? How's the traffic? How is, public safety, everything else. So looking at a number of different factors that one would consider when choosing a market where they might work and have to rent. And so here is some of that conversation that I had this week with WalletHub analyst Chip Lupo on what exactly they were looking at in this report.
What we looked at were two criteria: rental market and affordability, and quality of life. And I think you could probably conclude which one of those areas is probably going to drag the Washington cities down. But from there, we applied 21 metrics, and those measure basically rental attractiveness, quality of life, ranging rental rates, comparing between the rent and mortgage payments, historical price changes, cost of living, availability, safety, wide range of criteria there. Seattle, 84th out of 182, somewhere in the middle. Tacoma, again, 172, Vancouver at 160.
So out of those 180 American metro areas, there were 4 Washington cities that, ranked in there. None did terribly well. You did have Seattle come in at number 84, as you heard him say, and then Spokane at 152. Vancouver, Washington came in at 160th, and Tacoma was near dead last in the list at 172. But some states are doing a heck of a lot better. Again, when you consider things like the cost of the rent, the size of the place you get for that, the job availability in that area, traffic conditions, all those other sort of livability factors were considered. So here's what Chip Lupo at WalletHub had to say about the top placers in their list.
Well, the big winner is the state of Arizona. Three cities, Scottsdale, Gilbert, and Chandler, all part of the Phoenix Metroplex, top three. And then Peoria, Arizona at number 6. Overland Park, Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City at number 4. Columbia, Maryland, suburb of, sort of in between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, and at number 5. What's interesting is top 3, they do fare well in all 3 fare well in those rental market and affordability. But all 3 won in the top 10 in quality of life. I mean, you've got weather, and they're relatively safe once you get outside of downtown Phoenix. Now, of course, weather, if you don't mind the dry 110 heat pretty much year round, then that's be a good thing. So the weather is usually cooperative and it's relatively affordable. It's a pretty high income, predominantly mostly retirees, but there is plenty of leeway there for folks of middle income who want to rent in the Phoenix area, and those 3 are right there at the top of the list.
And a little bit of a closer look at the top 2 in WalletHub's placement for best places for renters, best and worst places for renters in the country. Scottsdale, the best city for both the availability of jobs and the driving environment. I guess traffic's not terrible in Scottsdale. They also have the 4th best weather and the 7th best recreation options in Scottsdale. Now, not the cheapest city to rent in. That only came in at 57th out of the 182 cities that they looked at. So not the cheapest rents, but people there on average are spending only about 22% of their income on their rent. And when you look at places like Seattle, where many are spending in excess of 30% of their income just for rents, that's where those Scottsdale numbers came in a little bit better. And then the city also has the largest home square footage in the country. Renters there have, on average, nearly 2,200 square feet for rental properties in Scottsdale. It's a lot bigger than my house. And that number 2 on that was Gilbert, Arizona. And they were the second best place to rent, according to WalletHub. 10th highest average home square footage in the country at 2,100 square feet, and 37th best rental affordability, with the average person in Gilbert paying about 21% of their income for rent. So a lot of things to consider here. Um, of course, those Arizona top placers, that's great if you can stand living in 100+ degree weather much of the year. For a lot of retired folks, that's a very welcome climate. There's others that prefer a climate like Washington, where we've, pretty much got 4 seasons here. So those are other considerations. But when you start thinking about, how burdensome rental prices are and how it's really keeping people out of being able to purchase their first homes in most of Washington state and many other, high cost states, that is, you start to consider, well, maybe I can withstand a climate of 100 degrees. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad year round. And it is sad, of course, because I know many of you, like me, I've got adult children in their 20s who wonder if they're ever going to be able to afford purchasing a home. They're locked into these high rents where they pay more than I do for mortgage payment. And again, they're just throwing it away month after month. And as a result, then unable to really save for a down payment on a home. So a lot to consider, a little bit discouraging when you think about it, but we got to expose it and talk about it. And hopefully we can do some things to maybe remediate and maybe make some policy changes that will reduce some of those burdens for our renters here in the state.